Aaron Lutzi, we're back. Episode 10, double digits, second nature. What up, bro?
Double digits, man. This is happening. We're in it.
Dude, I gotta say, episode 9, best episode yet. As much as it pains me to admit it, because I was noticeably absent on the podcast, you took the reins and delivered us to glory with a spectacular interview of Rebecca Rusch. How does it feel to be the best podcaster in the world?
I I will say that I absolutely had a lot of help from Rebecca. She was so dialed and she had so much value to bring to. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're an athlete or not. There was so much in that interview that I felt like was valuable to just about anybody. You want to do an event, you want to get in the outdoor industry, you want to start a charity, you want to be in an Emmy award-winning film. She gave a lot of really positive input and just nuggets of wisdom that I was even like taking notes during that thing. So big props to Rebecca. She's been a supporter since day one of this podcast. And it was, that was like one of my top people that I wanted to bring on because I felt like exactly that. She had so much to offer. And yeah, I don't know. And also, I gotta say, I've been listening to all your podcasts, so I just was taking notes the whole time and doing my best Debo impression.
Yeah, right. Well, Rebecca Rusch needs to be a recurring guest so that I can have the honor of asking a couple of questions. You called me while I was listening to the show on Friday morning. Of course, I headed out for a training run. I had a particularly hectic week last week as we launched TrailCon, which we're going to talk about later in today's episode. So I had to sit out second nature, but went out for my run Friday morning, plugged in the pod, and you called me when I was 20 minutes deep. I said, bro, I'm smiling ear to ear. I've been thinking about, launching second nature for such a long time. And this is exactly the type of content that I would want to listen to and exactly what I envisioned with this whole project to begin with. So congratulations, Lutz. It was amazing. I don't know if we have
Thank you.
any preambles or shout outs or stuff that we want to get out of the way, but I wanted to start today's episode with some of my takeaways from Rebecca's episode.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I want to say is that I really like the fact that we're not locked into one format. I like that if I'm having a crazy week, you can have a chat with somebody and vice versa. And there's no set format. There's no thing other than we're going to try to deliver as much value as we possibly can to help out people that care about the outdoor industry, that want to be a part of it, that want to learn from the people who are in it, that just want to experience it in some form or fashion. And that's what's most important. It's not, always going to be the same thing week in and week out. And I think that's what makes it kind of exciting. The only other thing I want to do a quick shout out. We mentioned in a previous episode that one way to get involved in the outdoor industry was simply to raise your hand to say, like, how can I get involved? How can I be a part of something? And we got to shout out Fiona. We got a message a couple weeks back from someone who said, hey, if I can help out with some research or helping you guys prep or anything I can do, I would love to just put my name in the hat to have a discussion. And we invited Fiona onto a call. We talked to her, and within like hours of the call, I have enough stuff to do like 100 podcasts. And I gotta say, my BPC from today is thanks to Fiona. So big shout out. She did exactly what we said you should do. And look at that. It worked out. She's now involved with the greatest outdoor business podcast of all time.
Shout out Fiona. When you say we got on a call with her, you mean that you, Aaron, got on a call with Fiona. Shout out her last name too, unless she wants to remain private.
Okay. I think we're good. Fiona Gallagher, she's a student on the East Coast, and what's really fun is she actually got into endurance sports from that triathlon life, who our friend Eric Lagerstrom runs. It's a triathlon YouTube channel, and he's going to be a guest on a future episode, guaranteed. So cool that like our big circle is just bringing people into the outdoor world. I love that about this whole thing.
Heck yeah. Thanks to Fiona. Okay, should we jump into my takeaways from Rebecca Rusch? Because I think this will be a really fun way to just do a quick callback to last week's episode and go one step deeper. I've got three things, and I narrowed it down to three. I could have easily done 10, but three of the most powerful ones. Maybe we'll tick through each of them individually and just spend a minute or two on each so that we don't rehash the entire episode. Again, if you didn't listen to episode 9, it's our best episode yet between Aaron and Rebecca Rusch. The first takeaway for me, Aaron, the simple practical advice or something that any professional athlete could apply tomorrow is the quarterly update to the sponsors that she mentioned as something that she had done in her athletic career to just help nurture the relationship between athlete and sponsor, to open up channels of communication. And to me, it feels like just such a simple differentiator that any professional athlete could use to show initiative, to show their proactivity and their interest in delivering value to their brand partners. Most professional athletes, I think, emphasize the word athlete in their approach, not the word professional. And this is exactly the thing that I wanted to get across in Second Nature in general. But over the course of many conversations, Rebecca distilled it to just one simple, practical thing that you can do that every athlete should do, and something that I'm going to adopt personally myself, and that I'm embarrassed I didn't think about. So maybe to pass it back to you, when you managed Rebecca, when you were at Red Bull, how does receiving that quarterly update make your job easier as a way to just describe the importance of this type of proactivity from an athlete?
The thing that's the most important to keep in mind is that typically when you're working at a brand, the sponsorship side of things, you're not the only person on the team. You're the touch point on the team, but the sports marketing team, the sponsorship team, the marketing team, the entire business is a lot of people. And so your number one job when you are a team manager, athlete marketing manager, whatever role you occupy to work with athletes, your job is actually to make sure that the rest of the business understands the value that that person brings to the table. And a lot of times the athlete manager or team manager will call the athletes on a regular basis and have a chat with them. And when they're doing that chat, they're collecting information that they can share back to the rest of the business so that they can basically do their own quarterly report. So when an athlete does that, they're basically doing the job of the team manager, the athlete marketing manager, and making it easy for them to forward that around. And especially in a place like Red Bull, where you've got athlete managers managing, 10 to 25 athletes, if you're doing that and you're making that job easier for them, and a bunch of the other athletes aren't doing that, you are going to stand out in a really positive way, and you're going to get the attention that you deserve. And so when an athlete does that, it's their way of sort of internal marketing, which is a really important thing, because if your name is top of mind with the key decision makers, the people who are talking about budgets, or in Rebecca's case, making $1 million films, it's pretty good to be top of mind, because you do get additional resources and you do get that extra boost from the sponsor when they're thinking about, who's killing it for us? Where should we put our resources? We want to go where there's momentum. And it seems like we just keep hearing Rebecca's name. We should probably put some more resources against this. And that's how you get that stuff. I think one of the things that I wrote down is that you don't passively become Rebecca Rusch. She has gotten to where she is at by actively making moves like this and making the jobs of the people she works with easier, and giving them a lot of surface area to really be creative and to help build with her. And I think that's really important.
Again, putting the professional in professional athlete, arming you with the information that you need to advocate for her more effectively internally. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up that came to mind as I was listening to it is how great you were for advocating for your athletes at Red Bull. And I wanted to provide a specific example for our audience here that I know you'll remember and that I'm sure you'll want to respond to. After 2018, Aaron, which was the best season of my racing career as a trail runner, I was considering hiring an agent at the time, a guy who I have a lot of respect for, who I'd interfaced with in a professional context. I was 32 at the time, so I considered that contract cycle a critical one for myself, going into what was likely going to be the final high earning contract cycle of my career. Although, maybe that's not necessarily the case. That was my mindset at the time. And both my big contracts were up with the North Face and Red Bull. So I thought, well, if I'm ever going to hire an agent, now would be the time for me to hire an agent. And when I talked to you about it, you said, basically, I was like, just struggling with this idea of how can I justify paying somebody a commission to manage relationships that I had built and cultivated myself through a lot of hard work and personal touch. And you said, hey, man, listen, you know that I already advocate for you internally. You don't need to hire somebody else to advocate for you. And you got to understand that if you put an agent in this process and he muscles me to increase this dollar amount, I got to go into another meeting with my boss to ask for more. That may raise some question marks in his head as to, is this the sport we want to be in? Is Dylan the right guy? Et cetera, et cetera. So a great example of, I think, how sports marketing is done in the right way, how you were so effective in advocating for us internally. And in order to help your athlete manager advocate for you internally, do things like Rebecca Rusch did by giving you the information you need to be that advocate that we need on the brand side. Response?
I think that you had already done the hard work. Like, there are really 2 points where a manager really comes in handy. Number one is opening new doors. So for example, for my super rider stuff, I actually do have a manager that I'm working with to just help me open as many doors as possible while I keep my focus in on the content, which is what's bringing the value to potential partners. I know that that's the most important thing that I got to keep my focus on, and I don't have time to do 25 cold calls. You were way past that. You already had Red Bull and you had North Face locked in, and everybody was happy with you and willing to give you that new contract. You didn't need help to open a door in that scenario. And so I saw it from the outside as like, why would you give away 10 or 20% of something that you've already earned? And the other point that I think I made to you on that call is like, hey, if you're going to be at a certain level, let's call it 200K plus, and you have multiple sponsors and you need somebody to keep all this stuff together, and you really think they can step on the gas for you, maybe at that point it does make sense to have a person managing that stuff for you, like you would have someone come in and run a business for you once it got to a certain point. But that in between zone where you've already done all the work and there's not going to be somebody jumping in to really stomp on the gas and, make you have a ton of additional deliverables, it didn't make sense to me to recommend that to you. And I think it was the right call.
Yeah. Well, having an agent can be the subject of an entire podcast, but it was something that came up in my brain as I listened to your episode with Rebecca. If you behave like a professional as an athlete and you have somebody who you trust as your athlete manager in yourself, Lucian, and there's a lot of great examples of people who occupy those positions across different brands in the outdoor industry, that maybe it isn't necessary, but I'm sure there's also a lot of agents who we could bring onto the podcast who, can prove out the value that they've delivered for their athlete partners and for the brands that they work with. So again, we can build on that in a future conversation, but something that came up in my mind as I listened to Rebecca and a big takeaway from episode 9. The other one was cross-pollination. These next two we can go through a little bit more quickly, but this is something that I think has come naturally to me and that I think has unintentionally been a benefit to building our business at Freetrail, because I'm constantly looking at things that are happening in different categories and different sports and different communities and taking and adopting those ideas and thinking about ways that we could bring them into trail running more effectively. And so I don't know, I think just the value of having a broad set of interests, and as you're wrestling with questions with your athletic career or with your professional career in general, to not necessarily just get myopically, preconditioned to just looking laterally within your sport or within your industry, but also looking to external places for inspiration. And there was a couple of examples that I could think of just from Freetrail that we could get into, unless you want to just kind of respond to the cross-pollination in general.
When I was coming up in mountain biking, we looked to BMX, and I know everybody in BMX looked to skateboarding and how skateboarding was doing stuff. And we took a lot of inspiration, both BMX and mountain bike took a ton of inspiration from skate. Red Bull made it easy because you were with skateboarders and BMXers and triathletes, and everybody was doing stuff and learning from each other. And then Red Bull had all these best practices that they were kind of pushing down on all the different sports. Yeah, I mean, it's why bother looking around your sport to copy what another person in the same circle is doing when you could look outward and bring that back to the sport and help grow the sport with those new tactics.
Yeah. So again, I've made my living in trail running for 15 years, and I've always been a big fan of sports. And a couple of things that have inspired me: Paul Rabel in building the premier lacrosse league. He was a Red Bull athlete for a long time, sort of the LeBron James of lacrosse for a long time, and now the commissioner of the professional league, who brings a very modern approach to an ascendant and much smaller disruptive field sport, who's fighting for market share with the MLS and the NBA and the NFL, et cetera. And they are crushing it. And I love the product. Something that really inspires me as I think about trail running in general and free trail's place within it is sort of taking that Paul Rabel playbook and applying it to our sport. Also, Pat McAfee on the media side, absolutely crushing it. Somebody whose show I listen to almost daily and who really inspires me. I think he's the most talented sports personality ever. And just the format of his show, I think, is perfectly attuned to the modern digital era. Super casual, super free flowing, bringing people in and out without sort of like this stale structure that you get on linear TV and most of ESPN. That's probably why ESPN brought him in. But then there's just a couple of examples of like with Free Trail, like we've got the fantasy platform. Of course, fantasy sports are popular and everything. Why not bring it to trail running? We've got our Trail Runner of the Year vote. So it's sort of like the end of year MVP. It exists in every sport. Why doesn't trail running have it? And of course, more recent example is TrailCon, which again, we're going to talk about in a bit, which is sort of an industry focused conference slash hopefully in the future trade show. So again, cross pollinate, look outside of your business, look outside of your category, outside of your sport to get inspiration and ideas. And I think Rebecca did a great job of
I would also
expressing that.
say I would also say look outside of sports in general. What are the things that are happening outside of sport that might be interesting to bring back? An example of that would be a lot of creators in the outdoor space have gone and looked at comedy sketches on Instagram and then made the bike version or the trail running version. There's plenty of examples in every single sport. In fact, I think the feed is even working with somebody who's like kind of a content comedy creator. So there's a ton of stuff of people looking outside sports in total and bringing some really interesting kind of fun things back to the world. And I think that's also another thing that we should be thinking about, not just cross-pollinating within sports and taking inspiration from there, but reaching well beyond it and seeing what's out there that could be useful.
Okay. Third and final takeaway, the best for last here, Lutzi. The sign of a good podcast is if you encourage somebody to take action after they listen to it. Okay. You and I haven't talked about this. The athlete operating system that Rebecca talks about in the podcast, mind blower. Again, so simple, so intuitive. I kick myself. Why didn't I think of that, for God's sakes? And, you guys were talking about something that has come up in our podcast many times, which is just the analog between business and sport. Sport is business. Operators are athletes. Athletes need coaches. Why don't we get coaching, for the business side of what we do? And, I think the other thing that she mentioned is like when she's business planning, right? Bring that athlete's mindset to it. Like you're setting up your racing season. Again, that was just like something that clicked in my brain of something that we don't do at Free Trail that we should do that would make my life a lot easier and that would reduce my stress load significantly, is just like, hey, let's map this out. Let's create the plan. Like, okay, here's the 5 big events that are going to take up the majority, or that we've emphasized as the priorities of our business this year. and plan for them accordingly. Build up, in the same way that you would structure your training, build up, okay, do we have the idea? Do we have the people in place that we need? Do we have the technology? Have we made the right investments? And bring that planning and athlete mindset to business planning, something that I'm going to do. And then, like I said, athletes need coaches. Operators are athletes. Athletes need coaches. Your boy is in the market now for real business leadership coaching. And I've already done some outreach. If there's anybody listening to the pod who has great connections or who is sort of a business coach, I'm in the market right now. So hit us up on Instagram, and I would love to start having some conversations. So again, the best podcasts lead people to take action. Lutzi, you inspired me to take action. You and Rebecca Rusch. Thank you for a beautiful podcast. It was really great.
Awesome. Thank you. I did my best Debo impression for an hour and a half, and it seems like it landed. So that's great.
Oh my gosh, dude. All right. Well, that was a 20-minute retrospective of last week's podcast, but you can tell it touched me, and I'm proud of you, buddy. It was really, really good. Should we talk about TrailCon?
Yes. Tell me everything. You launched a trail running. Tell me everything about this. You've been talking about having some sort of conference where everybody comes together, kind of a little bit of trade show, a little bit of panel, a little bit of media, like pulling it all together. It's obviously a key week between Broken Arrow and Western States, but fill us in on everything TrailCon. I want to know a little bit about the event, but I also want to get a little bit of postmortem from you of like, how did the launch go? What was the feedback that you got? And how do you feel going into it now that it's out into the world?
Okay, so I'll just launch into it, going from the very beginning, and feel free to just cut me off if you want me to go deeper on anything or if you have questions. So in episode 6 of Second Nature, we talked about Sea Otter, the Sea Otter Classic, which is, of course, the big mountain bike industry trade show and event that happens in Monterey. You had attended, and you and I have spoken a lot about Sea Otter, both personally and on the podcast. And I said in our show, your boy may be working on something similar within trail running. So basically what we're trying to do, again, an example of looking peripherally outside of your sport for inspiration of things that are missing, right? We want to have sort of the analog of Sea Otter for trail running. So Free Trail, we are partners in this with a couple of other individuals. One, Brendan Madigan, who owns Alpenglow Sports in the North Lake Tahoe area. He's also the race director of the Broken Arrow Sky Race, which is one of the most important trail races in North America. Somebody who's really well respected in the outdoor industry, who will definitely be a guest on the pod. In fact, we wanted him to come on this week, but he couldn't make it. So shout out Brendan Madigan. And then also Doug Emsley. And Doug will not be a name, I think, familiar to most people who listen to our show, Aaron, but it's funny. He's like an icon in the conference and trade exhibition industry. Like the analog I've been using with our team at Free Trail is like, we're starting an expansion NFL team with Bill Belichick as our coach. Basically, Doug is the guy who has experience bringing these things to market. He's one of the most respected people in the industry globally. So those are our partners on it. We feel very fortunate to be able to partner with both Brendan and Doug. And I think it's just an example of also looking for the right and most competent partners in things that we do. When we had Gorge Waterfalls, we talked on the podcast about how we partner with Daybreak Racing as our sort of racing event partner and how much value they bring to the table for us. So, I think as you think about with business, adding new things to your intellectual property, adding new things to your portfolio, not necessarily wanting to hoard everything for yourself, but find the right partners to bring in to help make it super successful. So going to the why of doing this, trail running is at a really interesting spot right now, Aaron. It's the fastest growing outdoor sport in the world, one of the fastest growing sports, period, globally. And it's in a period of transition. And this is one of the things that Doug has really helped us to think about, is that these moments in time are really important to bring the community together. There's been a few moments, a few touch points where things have gotten pretty heated online. There's been some controversial things that have evolved in trail running. And when all the conversation is taking place in the comment section on Instagram and Twitter, it's just not going to lead to any productivity. And what does, though, is actually getting people in a room and debating these topics and forging the next chapter of the sport together in a positive, unifying, and collaborative way. So just sort of like acknowledging that this is a moment of transition and using that energy to sort of emphasize how important it is to get people together. Getting people together, luckily, is sort of the easy part here. So in thinking about how to do TrailCon, really the one time it makes sense to do it is in this period between Broken Arrow and Western States. Broken Arrow, again, the race that's directed by Brendan Madigan, one of our partners, and Western States, the most important 100-mile race in North America, one of the most important races in the world. And in between the two races, which both happen in the Tahoe area in Olympic Valley, California, on consecutive weekends, there's a critical mass of industry people already there, co-located, and there's not much going on. So it's just an easy time to get the industry together to talk about the hard topics, to forge this path forward. So maybe I'll pause there. I know that was kind of a lot of info, but that's the why and the what of TrailCon. And I can go more into sort of the vision for 24 and 25, unless you have some questions.
I think it's really cool that you are bringing this together because I know that you've had the URL locked up for a couple years now. So it must feel great to actually finally put it together. I think you're right. This idea of getting people in a room together in previous events that you've put on with Free Trail, you've had kind of the Free Trail meetups and stuff. And that idea of community and connectiveness is what really drives so much forward. And especially if you have all these decision makers in one area, you can actually have some pretty productive conversations. It's not just like a high fives networking event, but it's really could drive the sport forward in a lot of meaningful ways. And I think that's something to not be understated is what impact it could have on the sport at large as opposed to just locally. Not to say it wouldn't also have that, but speaking about Rebecca's event that they put together at Sea Otter, where they just had this big gathering and a panel and all these different things, the benefit of that went so much further beyond just being at a panel. The connections that were made, the conversations that happened before, during, and after that panel as well. Super, super important. And I think that's exactly what this is going to bring. So this year is sort of essentially your proof of concept, your pilot for TrailCon. But what does the future of TrailCon look like? Where do you want this to go?
Okay. So again, yeah, as you said, soft launch 2024, bigger launch in 2025. This year, it's just one afternoon. We hope next year will be a multi-day experience that has both industry and consumer elements, like Sea Otter does, where we can get the industry together for these important conversations, which is going to be sort of the focus of this year, but then also give the consumer an opportunity to see some new products from the brands, to give brands an opportunity to interact with consumers and retailers like they do at Sea Otter, so that you activate sort of, have an impact both on the culture and on the future and the path forward for the sport, but also have an impact commercially for the brands to make sure that trail running remains a robust and growing economy. You and I spoke at length in our Sea Otter conversation about how mountain biking is sort of emerging from the wilderness right now after a tough return to reality after COVID. Ideally, what we can help prevent is, that sort of unforeseen market contraction, or at least start the conversation of what happens if and when this growth slows down. It is likely inevitable that trail running will, not grow at 30% per year like it has recently. And what happens when that's the case, especially for those of us who make our living within the sport? Because whether we like it or not, we have a responsibility for how everybody else experiences the sport. If we're not healthy, if we're not getting along, that trickles down to the average trail runner and impacts them negatively and creates this vicious cycle. So basically, we want it to become this annual gathering where we can have these important conversations, but where also brands have an opportunity to talk about their products to help build and increase the health of their own business so that average trail runners can have an opportunity to interface with industry people, with brands, with retailers, to give retailers an opportunity to interface with brands, and vice versa, to help improve the resilience and cohesiveness of the community more broadly. From the free trail perspective, I think this is just valuable to us as just being another piece of differentiated IP. You and I have spoken at length about how I get really self-conscious about how my podcast really drives free trail in general, and just feeling that that's not a resilient business model over the long term, and wanting to make sure that we are differentiated, that we do have a bunch of unique IP. And I think, TrailCon really fits within that to allow us to both be of service to the community, but also like build a resilient business. At the end of the day, we need to do that in order to justify how hard we work on it. It is free and unsponsored this year, so we are losing money. So we view this as an investment in the future. But at the end of the day, if it's never a commercially viable thing, but just remains an important sort of touchstone moment to increase that cohesiveness and unification within the sport, I think it'll be an investment well made. But hopefully it is something that makes a material impact on the revenue side of our business. Hard to forecast exactly what that might look like in the future, but that's
Or
sort
how
of
long and or
exactly
long it'll take to get there, right?
right.
I was just thinking about like what does actual success look like for TrailCon? And in my mind, from a qualitative standpoint, I guess what I would say is you've succeeded with TrailCon when someone books a flight to go there, not necessarily Broken Arrow or Western States, but they book a flight to be at TrailCon. I think that's the moment where you've tipped over into this is actually super valuable. And one thing that I think about the different corollaries between other trade shows or other events, things like that, the bike industry used to have this event called Interbike, which was in Vegas at the end of the season. And it was sort of a necessary evil because it was exactly this. It was when people came together at the end of the season to talk about what next season was going to be. But it never really made sense for the bike industry because we're riding bikes, we're outside, we're in the mountains, we're breathing fresh air. What business do we have being in some giant convention hall in Las Vegas, Nevada in September? Like, what is this? And I think the differentiating factor here is we're in the mountains, we're around races, around racers, we're all here collectively for all these other great moments in the sport to celebrate the sport and to be part of it in so many other ways. And I think that the way that you've chosen the weekend to kind of, or the week to kind of bookend TrailCon with Broken Arrow and Western States is genius. And I think it's hard not to be there. Why wouldn't you be at TrailCon when you're going to be doing all these other things within trail? And if you're not at Broken Arrow in Western States, what are you doing?
Right. Well, dude, I'm still holding a spot for you on our brand and athlete panel. I've been trying to twist your arm to come to TrailCon and deliver a TED talk to our participants. It's still TBD whether or not you're going to be able to make it, but I'm
I will
still
be
holding a seat for you, bro.
racing across the country on this filming road trip. But regardless, I will absolutely, if it doesn't work out this year, I think next year, there's a really awesome Second Nature panel or Second Nature Day that we could build into TrailCon. And there's so many different things that we could talk about, so many different people we could talk to. I just love the idea of doing a live Second Nature event, whether TrailCon or elsewhere. I think that'd be really fun.
So before we move off this topic, let me just give you a sense of our participants list. Hold on, I'm just pulling it up here because I think this is important about just getting that initial feedback from the market. And it's been very positive, which I think gives us all a sense of optimism that this will have the impact that we want it to have. We are very lucky to have the commitment from a lot of the most influential, most important people in the trail running industry. So just to tick through a bunch of names here, again, you can find it on trailconference.com. It's free and open to the public. So if you listen to Second Nature and interested in trail running or live in the Tahoe area, you can register now, trailconference.com. Some names that we've got committed: Billy Yang, Brendan Madigan, Brian Metzler from Outside, longtime journalist, Katrine Poletti, the founder of UTMB, Corinne Malcolm, of course, Craig Thornley, the race director from Western States, David Callahan from Ultra Sign Up, David Kilgore, who manages the trail running team at On Running, Megan Hicks from I Run Far, Mike Ambrose from Normal, Sally McRae, an iconic athlete, Tim Tollefson, our boy from Mammoth, et cetera, et cetera. We've got an incredible group of participants who are going to be sharing their valuable perspective with a large group of people. I mean, the registrations have been very strong too. So I think we're taking this initial feedback as like, there is demand for this type of an event to exist. So we just have to execute on it in a good way and hopefully build something that's really valuable for the industry in the future.
For the listeners who aren't trail runners or aren't engaged in that world, you just listed off all the hitters, basically.
I know. Yeah, it's really, really exciting. So
Actually,
anyway,
really, I discovered Sally McRae's YouTube channel a couple weeks ago. I think I texted you or called you about it. She's doing an incredible job for an athlete building up their own content and their own brand on YouTube through long form content. I'm a big fan of what she's doing there, and I may take some inspiration for some of my upcoming videos from her. I think what she's doing is really cool, and it's fun to watch that. I think I'd highlight it to you, like, yo, check this one out. She's incredible.
all right. Well, you'd be on the same panel with Sally if you make it. So maybe just in closing, because I didn't say this explicitly, we're going to have panels on events with a bunch of race directors. We're going to have a panel on the media with a lot of the different players in trail running media. We're going to have one at the intersection of brands and athletes, which is where Sally is going to be and where we want Aaron Lutzi to participate. And then we're going to have one at the intersection of brands and retailers. Those would be our 4 panels. And we're going to finish with a fun networking event and happy hour. So it'll be a nice afternoon of conversation on June 26th. Hope everybody can make it. Thanks for letting me talking about it here on Second Nature, Lutzi. The topic we wanted to move to here is something that you brought up, something that you feel really passionate about, and that is audience leads for products in the outdoor industry. Why don't you get us started?
So this past, I guess it was a week ago now, Tailwind Nutrition launched DeWalter melon into their actual lineup. So in previous years, they launched a watermelon flavor with Courtney Dawalter, and it was sort of like a limited edition thing, and it brought all these people who hadn't maybe tried Tailwind before into the brand. It was a huge win for them. I actually work with them on some consulting stuff, so I'm not going to drop any of the actual numbers, but I can tell you that it made a meaningful difference for them to do that limited edition flavor. And now they've made the decision, likely based on their experience last year, they made the decision to make that a permanent flavor within Tailwind, which is awesome for Tailwind. It's awesome for Courtney. And it really speaks to this ability for brands to leverage the talent that they have on their roster in more ways than just product visibility, right? Like they can actually sell something, they can create something, co-create something with someone who has a big audience that will bring new consumers into their brand. And I've seen this in a few other places done really well. Now, in lots of sports, there's like a signature product, for example, but in consumables, it's not too often that you see this. One of the original examples that I caught on to, this is years and years ago, there's a brand called G Fuel, and they are like a gaming energy drink. That's like their lane, is that we are just doing gaming stuff. But what they did, they sell like a powder that you mix in with water and then it turns into an energy drink, basically. And G Fuel was super smart. They just started picking out the creators who had mega audiences, including PewDiePie, who's like one of the biggest YouTubers of all time, one of the biggest gamers of all time. They made a flavor with him, and then they sold that flavor leveraging his audience, and I'm sure they did quite well, to the point where when Red Bull first got into gaming, G Fuel was actually one of the top brands that they were going up against. And there were a lot of reasons why G Fuel was a formidable, but ultimately this idea that they had to partner with somebody who had a big audience, co-create something, and then leverage that, I think had a huge impact. And so we're seeing this play out across other places like trail running with Courtney and Tailwind. And one of the other examples that's out there is your partnership with Gnarly Nutrition and the Orange Drink. So I'd love to hear from you. You know, you've done a lot of different partnerships with the, you know, the Feed is a partner now and all these guys. How does it go with Gnarly, and what's your experience been being part of, you know, the audience lead when it comes to product development?
Yeah, well, I'm in no way in the same stratosphere of Courtney DeWalter, but it was an honor to be able to have a product, a drink mix that I used myself and believe in, with my big dumb face plastered on the side of the packaging. So for those who don't know, yeah, one of our great partners here, in fact, the first brand to ever like reach out wanting to advertise with us, is Gnarly Nutrition, based out of Salt Lake City area. And last year we co-created the Orange Drink. It's part of their Fuel 2.0, sort of a high carbohydrate fueling drink mix for endurance athletes. And it had an extra sodium concentration. I'm somebody who likes a lot of sodium and electrolytes in when I'm training hard and racing. For whatever reason, I feel like my body responds well to increased electrolyte intake, and I always feel better when that's at the forefront. So that was sort of our calling card, or the differentiator between our flavor and a standard Fuel 2.0 offering. And then we collaborated on the marketing effort behind it. So we had a unique product that was specific to me, something that I believe in and used. And then we actually did what I think is one of the best ad spots in the history of the outdoor
Yeah,
industry.
no
And
question.
big shout out to John Perry, who's in charge of marketing at Gnarly. It was all his idea and his execution on it. But basically, of course, my nickname is Debo. And where Debo has appeared in popular culture in our lifetimes, at least, Aaron, was on Friday, the movie from probably the late 90s.
Mhm.
And so we riffed on a scene from the movie Friday where I played Debo from Friday. And basically, the whole idea was that I was stealing the hydration station from these guys who were sitting on, on a porch in Salt Lake City. Anyway, a brilliant advertising thing that brought everything together. And yeah, we did sell out of the product, and it was a fun project for us to be um, involved with. But I wanted to ask you though, because like, again, like I'm not in Courtney's league, and you know, PewDiePie, millions of followers. Like this is different. Like, how big do you have to be in order for this to be practical for a brand to think about as a strategy?
That's a great question, but I also think, what are you actually comparing it against? For example, if Gnarly just came out with Orange Drink and didn't attach you to it, they would still have to activate it. They would still try to sell it. They would have to figure out some reason why it was valuable to the consumer, and they wouldn't have as much to work with. When I think about having a partner like you, building an activation plan, building a story, not only did you help with the formulation and make it something that's credible to you, like you just said, oh, I want to have more electrolytes, I want to have more sodium in my thing. Oh, I want to be like Dylan. I want to train the way he trains. I want to fuel the way he fuels. Boom, automatically check the box there in terms of credibility of the product. Why should you use it? And same thing with Courtney's stuff. Like she, as I'm sure, has had a big hand in the formulation of the flavor and everything else that's gone into it. So you're automatically getting a boost in credibility over the rest of the options that you could have if you were going to go to that brand. You're also getting additional eyeballs on the brand because you do command a large audience from freetrail, from the podcast, and from everything else that you've done. I don't think there's a number necessarily. I think honestly, being credible and giving them something to activate around is really all that matters. Now, surely, if you've got 500,000 followers on Instagram, that certainly doesn't hurt. And I'm sure it does drive something to it. But I think that a lot of brands are just looking for some foothold to activate the products that they are coming out with. And I think a really smart way to do it is to think about who is the right person to boost our visibility and our credibility with this product. And if you think about everything, F1 exists apparently so that, you know, these car companies can, you know, build new technologies and introduce them back into the mainstream, right? And in that same way, you are the F1 of trail running. You're an elite athlete, and they want your input to make the best possible stuff for consumers that are out there running on their own. And so I think there's a lot that comes with that that isn't necessarily tied to a following. It's just kind of a nice to have. The credibility is what's important.
So maybe we could bring this conversation full circle by talking about true brand athlete partnership. The way to truly align incentives between brand and athlete is to make the athlete or the audience lead, as you call this person, a partner in the business. There's a couple examples here that I think will be fun to bring up and you can respond to, and I'm sure provide other examples too. Something you and I have talked about a bunch, both publicly and privately, is Kilian Jornet launching his own brand, Normal, after 18 years with Solomon. He realized, I've got a bigger following than this brand. Like, at what point do I start something that is truly my own or find the right partners where I have true ownership over the product line, the marketing strategy, the roadmap in the future, and have upside connected to that? Another example recently and from my world is Cam Hanes with Speedland, right? Like, I know for a fact as an audience lead, Cam is moving product for Speedland. I also know for a fact he's a partner in the business, right? And this, I think, is the wave of the future, because it's like, if you're if I were starting a new nutrition brand right now, that's the first thing I would do. Find an audience lead and incentivize them with a mixture of cash and equity, right? I don't know if Courtney has any ownership in Tailwind. I don't know if you know that. I'm sure you can't say if you do. But anyway, I think that whole athlete ownership thing is the wave of the future. And
Yeah,
the top tier athletes should be thinking, in what case can I have real aligned incentives with my brand partners, and ownership is the way to do it.
absolutely. I think the outside of the world of sports, you could look at Marcus Brownlee with Ridge Wallets. He's developing products with them. He's been a supporter. He's been involved with that brand for a long time, but now the CEO of Ridge sent out a tweet a while ago that was like, well, I will pay $1 million to have a creator partner because I think this is the way forward. And a bunch of people responded to it, but nobody was the right fit. And they actually went back to Marcus and were like, hey, what do you think? And he was like, I'm not going to take the $1 million just to exchange, but here's how I see this kind of fitting together. And there's something, that they were able to put together where he could have a big say in the future products that they come out. And absolutely, if Marcus Brownlee gets behind a brand and has a say in how it's developed, his entire crew that follows him is absolutely going to want to pick that up because they trust him. And that's what this all comes down to, is trust. I believe that this is probably a pretty good product if the person that I trust had a hand in developing it.
There's probably an interesting private equity play that could happen here if we're just riffing on ideas. If you could put together a killer team of operators with consumer packaged good experience, and then go to the likes of a Killian, a Cam Hanes, a Courtney DeWalter, a Marcus Brownlee, maybe, and come up with one product for each person, and then have one operations team that commercializes those products and then leverages the audience of each individual. That's an interesting idea, isn't it? We have our own little
Yeah.
private equity firm here now in the hopper. If we weren't too overemployed, Lucy, for God's sakes, too many ideas.
Second nature private equity.
All right. If you're an investor, just go ahead and hit us up. If you're an operator, hit us up. Actually, pretty soon, Aaron, we're going to need a CEO to run this second nature thing and our consumer product that we're still working on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jump in the
That could be
DMs
fun.
if you're qualified.
Hit us up.
All right, should we move to Camp Strava?
Yes, let's talk about it. So you've been to Camp Strava. This is an event that they hold every single year. I believe you met our friend Rich Roll there a couple of years ago, and then you flexed on me because you got his phone number.
Sent you a selfie as soon as I chatted with Rich Roll. Yep.
That's awesome. So Camp Strava went down last last week or the week before, they have a new CEO, Michael Martin, who has a really interesting background. He was the YouTube VP of shopping, which is a huge, huge step forward for YouTube. And prior to that, he was a VP at Nike. He was actually the VP GM, so Vice President General Manager of China. And prior to that was the global head of digital products. This guy's no slouch. They announced a ton of new stuff at Camp Strava. He did a thing where he read a bunch of mean tweets, and they announced they're finally going to make night mode, which is great. They've got AI to detect cheaters and to support people's training efforts. They've got a bunch of stuff, some features that are specific for a lot of the women users. They've got some partnerships that they launched. There's a family subscription plan that's coming out. There's a lot of big changes that he's made since he got there. I'm just curious, like your experience at Camp Strava in the past, what is it like? I mean, do you just go out and run and mark it on Strava, or is there more to it?
Yeah, no, it's a great event. I was unable to make it this year for the same reason I couldn't be on Second Nature last week. I've just been in a particularly busy time of year, but I went to the first two iterations, both in Southern California. I actually led a panel. I moderated a panel last year and ended up having to cancel my trip down to Southern California this year, but I was sorry to miss it, but heard it was a great time. But what it is, I mean, for someone like me, a great opportunity not only to learn a little bit more about Strava, a product that I love, but also to meet people like Rich Roll and bump elbows with people in the industry, to cross-pollinate, again, a callback to earlier in our podcast, and to network with people who, do similar things in running and outside of it. I have to say, I freaking love Strava, and I'm so happy they read some of the mean tweets, because I actually want to come to the defense of Strava sometimes. In fact, I had an idea, I think it was last year, there was a controversy when they took some of their important features and moved them behind the paywall. And I had this idea to write an op-ed titled "In Defense of Strava." And I think it's maybe a fun thing for us to talk about, outside of just Camp Strava itself, is just like the importance of paying for products that you use. And again, last year, I think you could quibble with the actual execution of the price increase that they instituted for the subscription and the moving of certain features behind a paywall. They'd probably admit that maybe they didn't do it in a perfect way. But the outcry from people who use Strava for free was just, to me, so obnoxious. And this is something that really you only understand when you own and operate a business, of just like, hey, we need to make money in order to survive. And Strava is the most valuable tool for people who are athletes. It is such an amazing product, something that that I've used for 10 years, that has become an invaluable catalog and record of all the activities that I've done over a decade, so that I can really cross-reference where I am now versus where I was earlier in my career, and where I can track totals and, set goals and all those important things that athletes like to do. And my point is that if you like something, you have to pay for it. Like Strava could easily put ads all over their app and website, and they intentionally don't do it. They want to be a subscription forward business that doesn't just become a graveyard of shitty ads, right? Like a lot of social media networks have become.
Yeah.
The subscription model is clearly their future. I don't know what the path forward for them is like. I would love to sit down with their new CEO and just talk about, what's the plan? Do you go public? Do you get acquired? What's the plan? But my point is just the importance of, if you like something, you have to support that business. Strava has 125 million users. I'd love to know the percentage of those people that actually pay for the subscription. I bet it's a small fraction. But for those of us who use it every single day and love the product, you do have to pay for it. You just have to pay for it in order for them to continue to invest in it. So I just wanted to, as somebody who's an admirer and user of Strava, to come to their defense in some ways, because I admire their business model. I admire that they don't take the easy path of just milking ads, but that they're trying to align the incentive with the user, give you a product that's worth paying for. But unfortunately, the consumer has just been so conditioned to not pay for things, especially social tools, that it's hard for them, I'm sure. Your
Yeah.
response, Aaron?
When I worked at Aura, it was the same exact thing. You used to not have to pay a subscription fee to have the ring and to get all the data. And when they switched over to make that a thing, when they launched the Gen 3 ring, it was a huge, huge moment. And a lot of people were very, very upset, to the point where they actually grandfathered in anybody who had one of the Gen 2 rings got free subscription for life, or whatever, when they switched over to Gen 3. But that was a big moment of reckoning for Aura. And it felt like a huge moment in the short term for anybody who hadn't been paying for it, that needed to pay for it. But I feel like a year or two later, it's just part of the deal. Like, the expectation is that you should pay for this, because that's when you first come into the brand and, oh, I have to pay for this. Okay. I think the same thing will maybe happen to Strava with like the next generation of Strava users, when it's just, oh, this is just what you do. If you need to have this app, you have to pay for it. And that's the hardest part about that phase of starting up, where you've conditioned 125 million users into thinking that this was something they didn't have to pay for. And now all of a sudden they have to pay for something that last week they didn't. That's where the rub is. But I think it gets easier as Strava continues to grow into the future and brings new users on board. And they have to be focused on that. I don't think Aura necessarily did it the right way by grandfathering in whatever percentage of their users, but it definitely softened the blow a little bit when it came for the Gen 3 launch. Although, that being said, they ended up firing their CEO like 2 weeks later, so who knows. I think the biggest thing, though, that's the most important, is that people, you and I have run our own stuff and have been involved in so many different things that we just assume that people are going to do a certain behavior. For example, on YouTube, did you know that one comment is the equivalent to 3 likes when it comes to the algorithm? And so commenting on a YouTube video is actually a way to boost its visibility. But most people don't know that. Most people don't realize what it means to like something, subscribe to something, share something, and how that actually impacts the success of something. Quick shout out, the Second Nature YouTube channel could use a couple more subscribers. But
Just drop a comment, subscribe, smash the like button.
but that's like what we understand. And, you and I always joke every week of like, hey, saw your newsletter, made sure to open it and click one of the links,
Damn straight.
because we care about the stats. And not everybody knows that kind of stuff and understands the importance of that. For guys like us who are still trying to put it together, we're not running businesses with 125 million users.
All right, so what about this? We're going totally rogue here. I got a couple galaxy brain ideas, right? One path is like, what if 125 million users, what if you immediately say, all right, this app costs $1 a month. Even if you churn 50% of the people off the platform, what would that be? $75 million in revenue? $62 million in revenue a month for Strava?
That'd be pretty great.
Wouldn't that be, maybe that's the path forward, rather than try and squeeze $100 out of a small fraction, squeeze $12 out of everybody, right? Here's my other big galaxy brain idea. Okay, I just had this. Okay, I mean, you and I talked about, well, maybe what Strava could do better is make the platform more friendly to creators, especially creators like us who exist in the sports world. What if, like, for example, I could put a bonus episode of the Free Trail podcast that was only available for subscribers to Strava. I don't know necessarily how you'd align those incentives, but the bigger galaxy brain idea I just had is, what if Strava like bought Substack, right? And integrated that type of tooling into their platform, where I could write a newsletter that would appear in app on Strava and where the creator would have some sort of revenue share with the platform, and they would obviously help with distribution and reach with lookalike audiences. In other words, they could put my content in front of everybody who tags at least one trail running activity per week, right? Because I don't know, I think people are accustomed to subscribing for content based things, but not for social based things. So
Right.
if you integrate more creator tools, maybe you have an easier time pulling subscription revenue. Comments?
I
Galaxy
think
Brain?
my galaxy brain goes to the congruencies between what is that audience actually doing. They probably do spend enough time on Instagram that they're not necessarily looking for creators to view images or articles or anything like that. But one of the number one things that we always hear, oh, I'm going to save your podcast for this weekend when I'm on my long run. So I think actually the audio side of Strava is worth exploring more than anything else. And yeah, if you could use those resources to bring in some exclusive audio, I think that's where Strava could do the most, whether it's a partnership with Spotify, maybe, or it's a partnership with some of the big podcasts or something along those lines, because that's what people are doing. What other app is open when Strava is open? Probably podcasts. And so that's where I would probably go first.
Okay, so Michael Martin, new CEO of Strava. Hit up your boys, Debo and Lutzi. They also have a new chief product officer and new chief technology officer. So it's a new day at Strava. Again, I love the platform. I love the product. It's given me so much value. I was sad to miss Camp Strava this year. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the market has always viewed Strava as something that's underperformed its potential, I think.
Mhm.
But it's just not easy, right? When the competitive set is the likes of Meta, Twitter, Instagram, social platforms that all have an ad-based model and they're the lone subscription-based model. Did you know this, Lutzi? The founders of The Athletic, which is the leading subscription-based sports content platform that the New York Times bought for $500 million last year, was founded by two guys from Strava.
Huh.
This is
Interesting.
there's a quite a talented group of alumni from Strava. But anyway, fun conversation. Sad to miss out
Next
on the
year,
event this
hit up
year.
your boys.
Yeah, well,
Second Nature podcast, Second Nature panel. I'm down. I'm down if you are.
yeah, I wonder what their roadmap is, though. You know, like, can they eventually go public, or does somebody like who buys Strava? Nike, Apple? Who
Hard to
knows?
say. Like if there was a wearable that wanted to completely own that outdoor space,
Garmin?
that'd be the move. Yeah.
Cool. All right, should we close it down with BPC?
Yeah. Let's do it.
You go first.
Okay. Okay. This week's BPC, K Wine by Design. Have you heard of this?
No.
Excellent. There is a woman on Instagram who posted a video that said, I'll make cool designs for every brand that comments. And it blew up. So she's actually super into the outdoors, skiing, running, all these different outdoor sports. And she's a pretty sick designer. And the comments off of that one video were insane.
This is
All
on
these
Instagram?
on Instagram,
Okay.
all these people hit her up. So let me give you a quick rundown of how many brands responded to this to start. Uh, Porsche, Dunkin' Donuts, Firefox, Samsung, Major League Baseball, Mini Cooper, Volkswagen, Stance Socks, Faction Skis, FedEx, Reebok, Dwight Howard, North Face, Arc'teryx, and a few others. That post just went crazy, which is awesome. So she basically just decided to offer up her design services to any brand that wanted something. And because she had then a mega following and people were paying attention, she had the ability to actually follow through on this stuff. And what's the best part about this whole story is not that she did designs on Instagram for the North Face or for Arc'teryx or for anybody. It's that the brands actually followed through, because it's one thing if you're a social media manager for the North Face being like, yeah, let's do it, and leave a comment. It's another thing when the brand fully commits to it and actually releases a product with you based off of that Instagram exchange. So Trek Bikes actually just launched a product with her. The North Face has some stuff. It's incredible. Champion did something with her. If you go to, I'll put this in our newsletter. I'll put a link in there. Kwine by Design, KWEIN by Design. She's a great artist. She's a good designer, and to see the response and see all the comments is really fun. Last week I had another Instagram situation that, kind of sparked this avalanche of eyeballs and followers and content, and this week it's a little bit different but still pretty cool. She's up to about 150,000 followers over the last 6 months or so, and she's got, I think, some skis, some outerwear. They did this big art show. She's doing some really cool stuff, and I genuinely kind of like all the art that she's working on, so have a look.
Bro, you are on a BPC heater. Last week was an all-timer. This one also fantastic. I just pulled up her Instagram account and followed her. So I'm going to go deep in the comment section here. Is this an example of audience-led products?
Absolutely.
See, look at this callback. Way to go,
See?
Aaron. All right. This is so funny. Like we each have sort of a different style for our BPCs, which is becoming evident here as we crack double digits on Second Nature. I've got one sort of a content thing that I will be consuming this weekend, and then 2 callbacks to previous things that we've talked about on the podcast. My BPC for this week is NCAA college lacrosse, Aaron. We're coming up on Memorial Day weekend. I played lacrosse as a kid growing up through college, and Memorial Day weekend is holy time in the lacrosse community. So the semifinals take place for the men on Saturday, and then the championship is on Monday. So that's what makes it cool. It's like, sort of March Madness where important games happen in the span of only a couple of days. And it's always such exciting, great sports material that's been important to my life ever since I was 13, 14 years old. So I'm going to get my run done early on Saturday morning. I'm going to park my butt on the couch. I'm going to get the hall pass for my wife, and I'm going to watch some lacrosse this weekend. We got the University of Denver playing the University of Notre Dame, 2 schools that have personal significance to me. I'm rooting for the Irish, the Golden Domers, and then we've got Maryland, Virginia on the other side of the bracket of long-term rivalry, 2 of the most dominant programs in recent memory. And the winner of those 2 games will then play on Memorial Day on Monday next week. So college lacrosse, not the outdoor industry, but great content. And we talked about Paul Rabel earlier in today's show. Lacrosse, the game of the future, a fantastic sport. And then I got...
So I'm not going to be able to get a hold of you this weekend, huh?
Not Saturday morning, buddy. You can call me after about 1 p.m. on Saturday, and then we're good. Okay, perfect. 2 quick callbacks here for our audience, okay? I just got issue number 201 of the Mountain Gazette, which if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it in my hands here on screen. It is completely beautiful. It's exactly what I was hoping for. For those who listen to episode number probably 7, I guess it was, that we did with Mike Rogie, you'll know that I'm a big admirer of the magazine and think it's well worth the subscription, going back to the Strava convo. If you like something, you got to pay for it. You should pay for the subscription to Mountain Gazette. And then also, it was probably like episode 4 or 5 where I talked about Samaya Equipment, a brand that I found on Instagram and that I commented had ridiculously high friction because I had to punch my email address into their website to even look at their products and even begin shopping. They had to collect my email. Anyway, the backpack that I bought is so dope, Lucy. It came last week. I'm going to bring it with me to Europe. We leave on Sunday to go to Austria. I'm running a race out there on June 1st, and I got a brand new backpack to take with me. It's super cool, technical. It's made for like hardcore mountain sport. I'm going to be using it more as like a Gorp Core travel bag, but wanted to give a shout out to Samaya Equipment. I'm really glad I bought the product and excited to test it out. I can't remember the name of it. I think it's like the Pace bag. I'll put the link to it in the show notes in case people want to check it out. But really, really nice product. So
It's funny that you talk about this idea of high friction, because actually it just qualified you as a buyer. You know, if you're putting your contact information in to have a look at this stuff, probably the chances that you're willing to shell out for it are a lot higher than someone who's just browsing the thing. So maybe it's, I don't know why you would do that in the first place, but it is definitely a way to qualify people. And maybe that makes their follow-up flow. Because, you know, a lot of these websites for D2C brands actually capture your email one way or another. And then they send you a note that's like, hey, you were on our website, or that's how they target you in Instagram ads or whatever else. They get your information through cookies or however the internet works. I don't know. But that was like a way of figuring out, well, these people are obviously the highest intent purchasers if they're willing to give us their email in the first place.
yeah. So anyway,
I could,
yeah, and just something that's different too, right? And going back to your BPC last week, and I mean, I don't even remember the brand's name that we're smashing the mocktails.
Mixology. Yeah.
Mixology.
But I think they're going to change when she hits 500K, which she's well on her way to doing. She gets to actually change the name of the brand if she
Yeah.
wants, which there's definitely a good play on like smash your thirst, you know?
But anyway, they're obviously doing it in a totally different way. And maybe Samaya's recognizing that too. Like, hey, maybe we don't want every single person to buy this. Maybe we do want you to give us your email address to even make sure that you're serious enough to
Absolutely.
look
Yep.
at our product. So anyway, and I'm glad I bought it. Like, this thing is really, really nice. So like a
Very
fun
cool.
callback there for those who've been longtime listeners.
Yeah.
Lucy, so good to be back on the horn with you, buddy.
It's good to have you back. Thanks
Yeah.
for the time today, and yeah, lots of exciting times. Have a great trip to Europe. I'm excited to hear about your return to form, and this event in Austria I think is going to be a good one.
Yeah. So to our listeners, we're still TBD on what the next couple of weeks are going to look like, but there's definitely going to be content. Whether I'm available or not is still up in the air. But
I got some stuff up my sleeve. We should be.
you've proven you are capable of carrying the show without me. Much to my chagrin, God damn it, you're too good. Well, bro, yeah, great to see you again. To our listeners, if you haven't, make sure you go over to our YouTube channel, smash the subscribe button, leave a comment in today's show. It's, you know, it's good for 3 likes if you do that. Leave a comment, subscribe to the newsletter at secondnature.media. Type it into your browser, and then also follow us on Instagram, secondnature.media. If you have comments, questions, kudos for us, you can drop those on Instagram, secondnature.media, in our DMs. For Aaron Lutzi, I'm Debo. We'll see you soon.